Thank you for joining us today. My name is Stacy Huff, and I serve as the president of the Louisville Forum. We meet on the second Wednesday of every month at Vincenzo's Restaurant. The Louisville Forum is a nonpartisan public issues group founded in 1984. The Forum hosts debates and discussions of contemporary and sometimes controversial public policy issues that affect the greater Louisville community. Although we may take up issues that have a national interest, we try to highlight the local perspective. For more information on the Louisville Forum, our programs, or to make reservations, please visit us at www.louisvilleforum.org. Our topic today is Louisville's budget crisis, the $65 million question. Since Mayor Fisher announced that he expected the city budget to have a $65 million gap over the next 4 years, partly due to rising pension obligations, it's been nearly impossible to go even a day without reading or hearing something about this topic. Many questions arise when hearing such a large gap, $65 million. There are a lot of resources out there right now on the internet that address a lot of our questions, but just to restate the questions that hopefully our panelists can help address today. A lot of questions, why? How did we get here? Whose fault is it? Is it anyone's fault? Is it all due to the pension issue? Is the only answer to raise the insurance premium tax specific to certain insurance policies? If funding is cut, how will it affect me personally? How will it affect my businesses? Are there any other alternatives? What are they? The council must vote to pass any ordinance by March 21st for it to go into effect by July 1st for state law, a little over a week from today. That is why we are so grateful that our panelists took time out of their busy schedules to share their insights and thoughts with us today and maybe help answer some of the many questions that we have. Participating on our panel today is Councilman Brent Ackerson, Councilman Bill Hollander, Councilman Anthony Piagentini, and Louisville Metro CFO Daniel Frockt. I'm going to turn it over now to them individually. They're going to have opening remarks, about 3 to 5 minutes apiece. And again, as they're speaking, please jot down your questions for our board members to come and gather from you. So we're going to begin with Brent Ackerson. Brent has been the councilman of the 26th District since 2008. He currently serves as chair of the Oversight and Ethics Committee. Brent is a graduate of the University of Akron College of Law, is a practicing attorney with Ackerson Law Office. In 2011, he was the recipient of the Gary Gupton Community Award for helping to complete the new Down Syndrome of Louisville facility, the only facility of its kind in the U.S.
Thank you all. I'm today here, the issue has been framed as a $65 million hole, and I'm here today to say I view it a little bit different. I view this as a $35 million hole. That's the immediate hole that I, as a council person, feel like I need to fill. Historically speaking, we've dealt with each budget year one by one, okay? I'm not an anti-tax person. I believe that there are taxes that are beneficial to the community. Mayor's office was a big proponent of LIFT. I thought that was fantastic. People voting on something to tax themselves to invest in their future. This tax, though, I'm not in favor of at this time. I think it's the wrong tax at the wrong time for all the wrong reasons. Plain and simple. I think that this tax will hurt people. It will hurt low-income people. It will hurt poor people. It will hurt people on fixed incomes. And therefore, they will bear a huge burden of that, and that's the wrong solution that I view this as. I think it'll hurt our business economy. I mean, everybody talks about looking at all the great things that we've done in Louisville. We've done some good things, but we're not the stellar community that we'd like to pretend to be. We've got a lot of things still to do. We're not keeping up with Nashville and Cincinnati and Indianapolis, and so we can't play their ball game. It's kind of like if I'm Temple basketball, I play slow-paced defense. I don't play Kentucky, run and gun. We got to play our game in order to advance the way we want to advance. I want to take a little quick walk down memory lane. Back in 2008, we had a $13 million shortfall. Fiscal year 2009, we had a $29 million shortfall. In Jerry Abramson's 2010 budget address, he talked about the neighborhood departments would have the largest percentage of positions cut at 22%, followed by Metro Parks at 18%. Police and public protection agencies would see only a 1.3% reduction. Okay, in order to address budget shortfalls, in the past, we have looked to cuts for those corrections. Let's jump forward to 2011, Greg Fisher's first year in office. In that year, I'm looking at a May 2011 Courier-Journal article, newspaper article here, talked about we had a $22.5 million shortfall. We talked about the sale of surplus properties. We talked about cutting positions, 20 business managers' positions. We talked about asking government employees to take furloughs. Under $70,000 a year, those employees were asked to take a one-week furlough. Anyone making over $70,000 a year was required to take a one-week furlough. Greg at that time was quoted as saying, "I want to maintain the basic services to the community, and the best way to do that is to ask everybody to take a little bit of this hit." Not a tax on any of those things. Let's jump forward to 2012. In 2012, there's an article that you can get online where Mayor Fisher did an interview. And the question in the interview, and these are quotes, the city is facing an estimated $42 million budget deficit over the next 17 months. Can you describe the process of deciding where to make the necessary cuts? And our mayor at that time said, we had two different budget challenges. One is filling the gap for the fiscal year, which will be over June 30th. That's about $12 million gap. And then we have another problem with the fiscal year 13, which will be somewhere between 20 to 30 to $40 million range. The problem is we have a structural imbalance. Our expenses are growing a lot faster than our revenue. In 2012, we were acknowledging a structural imbalance in this city. If you listen to your Metro Council and you listen to the administration, you will recognize in 2019, we still have that structural imbalance. Plain and simple, we need to take a modern-day approach to the way we're doing business. And the only way that's going to come is not from a tax, which is a simple solution to say, let's stay the course. It's going to come from tough decisions, budget cuts that could hurt. I would say this. You say, Ackerson, where would you cut? Very simply, before we can actually talk about where we would cut, we need audits. We need to have full budget hearings like we've done every year when we're deciding the budget. We've had none of that. So it's hard to say where you would cut. It's hard to turn to Public Works and say, if we had to cut you by 10%, tell me what you would do. How would you do it? That's the intelligent way to address this problem, rather than just to rush to a tax or try to find a middle ground. Say, well, the mayor wants 15%. What can you live with 5 or 10? This is not a negotiation. This is our future. That imbalance that we talked about in 12 continues unless we address it. And what better time to address it than with a $35 million hole? And that's what we have. If we can solve the $35 million hole, then next year we're talking about a $10 million hole. Last year we had a $10 million hole in our pension crisis. If we deal with it year by year versus trying to tax it all up front, we're going to be much more solid as a community. Now, public safety, if you start off with when I looked at last year's budget numbers, it's hard. I'm not Daniel. I don't have Daniel's team. But I look at the fact that there is anywhere between $623 million in sort of what we spend to $674 based upon monies that come in that we're required to spend certain places. Public safety is going to amount to about $35 million of that $67 million. And thus, if you took that off the table, the other $32 million by 10% cuts gets us close to the $35 million hole. Then the question is, the mayor proposes $15.4 million in cuts to public safety. They said that's a travesty. We only have to come up with a few $1 million from there. The question is, can we turn to other resources to come up with that money? And those are all discussions we need to have that we cannot have by this rushing the tax through. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Brent. Our next panelist is Councilman Bill Hollander. Bill is the councilman for the 9th District. He took office on January 5th, 2015, and he currently serves as the chair of the Budget Committee. Councilman Hollander is an attorney, former managing partner at Wyatt Tarrant & Combs. He received his undergraduate degree from Harvard and his JD from IU. Councilman Hollander has been involved in numerous community organizations and is a former two-time Bingham Fellow. Join me in welcoming Councilman Hollander.
Thank you very much. This pension bill that we have received from Frankfurt is large, and it's real, and it's not something we can affect. It's something we just have to pay. Between fiscal year 12 and fiscal year 18, our pension obligations were $73 to $76 million every year. Pretty steady. And then we know, because of some changes in assumptions by the Kentucky Employees Retirement System, our bill is going to go up 12% a year. In fiscal year 23, we'll be paying $60 million more every year than we paid in fiscal year 18. And that's out of a $620 million general fund operating budget this year. We began dealing with this situation last year by eliminating 49 positions in metro government. Now we have to deal with it this year. And the responsible thing to do is not to kick the can down the road, but to deal with the issue that we know is coming through fiscal year 23. $60 million more every year. The Democratic caucus has listened to our constituents. We've talked to each other, and we're coming together for a plan to address this and not kick this can down the road. We had 120 speakers come to council. We've answered dozens of questions on the city website. We've had meetings throughout the community. And what we're coming toward is a consensus that we should have a balance of increased taxes and service cuts. And there will be cuts under the plan that we will propose tomorrow. It's a revised plan from what we had originally. We would increase insurance premium rates to 9% for the next 2 years, from the current 5% for property and casualty, and then to 10% thereafter. And there would be much smaller increases in vehicle insurance rates, rising to a maximum of 6.5% from the current 5%. We would also have a 3% auto rental tax, which is the maximum we currently can do. The question, I'm sure, is going to be why insurance premium taxes? And the answer is our options are very limited by Kentucky law. That's why, and I'll get to this in a minute, many cities and counties around the state, including many in Jefferson County, already have insurance premium taxes well above Louisville's. The ordinance that we'll vote on tomorrow at the Budget Committee would also reserve everything, every dollar that we would raise from the increase in insurance premium taxes to a special fund dedicated solely to paying the increase in our pension costs. We would also lobby for new revenue from Frankfurt, as we've been doing for a long time, unsuccessfully, but we'd continue to lobby, and the ordinance would say that we shall revisit the increase in insurance premium taxes if we get those options from Frankfurt. And we approve those options. We'll decide on cuts as part of the budget process when the mayor presents his budget on April 25th. And as Brent says, we'll have extensive hearings on that budget. But we know that there will be painful cuts even if we pass the ordinance that we'll be voting on at Budget Committee tomorrow. Very painful cuts. We've suggested some of them, hiring freezes to reduce the number of layoffs that we would have, and there will be layoffs, eliminating funds for the Belle of Louisville, reducing recycling in the urban service district, closing the youth detention center. And if you don't think there are issues with doing that, look at the WDRB report on the youth detention center. There are costs involved in every one of these cuts. We would cut the salaries of people making over $90,000 a year by 5%. There are costs in that too. We need to retain talented city employees. We would close the living room. That's a new program for people dealing with addiction and mental illness. But it's something that we won't be able to pay for with the kind of revenue that we can raise. There will be many more cuts. Now, I just want to address a couple of myths. The comment that we just don't have a budget and we should just wait until we get one, in my view, is really an abdication of leadership. We know that this bill is coming from Frankfurt, and we have to pay it, and we will not be able to affect it. I think leadership requires that we deal with it and not kick the can down the road. Some people have said we need a one-year plan, but a one-year plan for a four-year problem is not leadership. It's irresponsible. We'll have more cuts next year. And our partners and our employees and our citizens ought to be able to count on what their government is going to do instead of every year looking at what are we going to cut this year. Last week we heard a comment that March 23rd is not a real deadline. It was just made up so the mayor could get in your pocket quicker. That's actually not true either. It is a real deadline by state law. Unless we pass this by March 23rd, we will not have any revenue from insurance premium taxes increased in next fiscal year. And finally, that there are easy cuts out there. Well, we've said from the beginning, if there are cuts that you think are easy, tell us what they are. And to say, no, it's the mayor's job to tell us what they are, we're not going to give any more revenue, I think is irresponsible. No one wants to raise your taxes, and most of us don't want to cut your services. But this pension bill from Frankfurt is real. It's growing, and the responsible thing to do is to compromise, and we're trying to compromise to find an acceptable way to deal with that bill. That's what we were elected to do.
All right, thank you, Bill. All right, our next panelist is Anthony Piagentini. Anthony was elected to the council in November 2018 to serve as councilman for the 19th District. Anthony currently serves as the vice chair of the Committee on Labor, Economic Development, and Contract. He is a Kentucky businessman who earned his undergraduate degree in economics, later earning his MBA. Anthony is also a veteran of the United States Marine Corps Reserve. Please join me in welcoming Anthony.
Thank you and good afternoon. It is really an honor to be here. I would like to thank Louisville Forum for the opportunity. First time attending one of these, nothing like being on stage first and foremost. And I'd like to thank my colleagues for joining me as well. There are some facts that are indisputable. Certainly we do have at least right now a 1 year, $35 million problem that needs to be solved. And Bill's right, there's a structural issue. Over the next 5 years it does stack up till approximately $65 million. But I do want to begin, at least in talking about this next year, in putting to rest one of the chief retractions of those that are talking about cutting spending, like myself. And that is the dire, catastrophic, unthinkable consequences of cutting this budget and the hyperbole bordering on Armageddon when we talk about making that cut. This year we're going to spend, and Bill already mentioned this, about $625 actually million in general fund expenditure. The prior year's budget that ended July of 2018, the general fund actual expenditure was $595 million. The mayor campaigned during that time that this city was in wonderful shape when we were spending $30 million less than we are currently spending. Quite simply, I'm asking we return to that time of utopia that he campaigned on in reflecting on how wonderful this city was doing, where we were spending $30 million less than we're currently spending right now. But with that said, we do have to move forward, and I realize before Daniel, I'm sure, is going to correct me related to cost of living adjustments and other things. If you want key numbers, Daniel's your man, I am not. But as we have to move forward, I did want to take the opportunity to dust off my undergraduate economics degree for a moment. and explain what happens when we engage in these two scenarios. One, which the mayor has proposed, and Bill's right, there is a Democrat group that wants to make some compromise, and there's a bipartisan group so far that has proposed starting with cuts. Okay. So first, the tax increases. The total tax impact of the mayor's proposal right now is over $65 million. That number was ascertained over the 5 years if we implemented the mayor's plan. That assumed all the suburban cities would similarly increase their taxes. Most of them mirror, some don't, but most of them mirror what we currently do, 5% insurance tax. So the real impact on residents and citizens of Jefferson County will be closer to, let's call it $75 million. That's how much money will be taxed out of your wallets over the next several years under the mayor's current plan. So this is the worst kind of tax increase, because I agree with Bill. Unlike the local options, or actually, I think Councilman Ackerson said it, unlike the local option sales tax that goes to reinvest into your community, this goes into a bank account to pay a debt for future retirees. It will not be spent in the economy. It is like a vacuum cleaner that's going to suck $75 million of economic activity out of this community over the next several years. That's money that would have been spent by residents on movies, on groceries, on restaurants, buying items at the drugstore, and instead it's going into this bank account. This will reduce economic activity by the total amount of that tax every year forever. The problem is this effect is not realized independent of human behavior. There's a reason why people have quit smoking. It's not because they think it's the right thing to do. It's because we overly tax cigarettes. For every dollar we increase the tax on cigarettes, you find less demand, supply and demand, right? The mayor himself is advertising for people to check their premiums, see if they are overinsured. The problem is he made his revenue assumptions based on current premium rates, and now we are encouraging people, and by their own behavior they will engage in this, to think about reducing their insurance or adjusting their premiums. When that results in underperformance of this tax, what do you think the mayor will do next? He's made it very clear that he can't find $1 to cut in a $625 million general fund budget. If we have a recession, God forbid, what will he do next? Again, he has proposed 0 cuts, 100% tax increases. This will put us into a spiral that high tax states can't figure their way out of. They tax people too much compared to other similarly situated states, in our case cities, so people leave, the state has less money, and instead they raise taxes and the spiral continues. Luckily, there's another option, and that's to cut spending. So what happens if we cut spending? Daniel's, I'm sure, going to talk about this. We are a service industry. That means that most of our money is spent on labor. Most of budget cuts are in future reductions in labor force and or potentially reductions in force, right? We have to reduce labor force today. I've met with Mary Ellen Wiederwall, the chief of Louisville Forward, mayor's staff, and she acknowledges, as do I, that we are at full employment in this city. We have an excellent economic environment and business environment. Those people that are not hired or that are reduced, they're not going to sit at home and do nothing. They're going to take a private sector job. That shifts their liability and their tax liability, not just for future pension obligations, but their liability on the current general fund to then being a net tax contributor. That solution will accelerate us out of this problem much faster than simply increasing taxes. So there's our choice. Do we adopt the philosophy of taxing our way out of the budget problem, which will only drive away private dollars and possibly put us into a tax spiral that's difficult to pull out of? Or do we cut, resulting in more people entering the private sector, accelerating us out of the problem, and with some short-term pain, puts us in the best situation for long-term structural reform? For me, that decision is simple. We must first do what every constituent must do when times are tough, and that is tighten our belt and live within our means. Thank you.
Thank you, Anthony. Just a reminder, if you have questions, our board members are going around collecting them. Just hold them up, and they'll come gather them. And then we will open the question session after Daniel speaks. So our final panelist is Daniel Frockt. Daniel is a Louisville native and the CFO for Louisville Metro. He leads the Office of Management and Budget, which is responsible for the city's finances, including its operating and capital budget. Daniel has an MBA from the University of Texas at Austin, I believe a Master's of Education from the University of Washington, and a BA from the University of Pennsylvania. Please join me in welcoming Daniel.
Good afternoon. Thank you for the opportunity to address you, and thank you to our fellow panelists, council members, and the only 3 people who actually get to vote on the proposal that's before you. I will be relatively brief, as much ground has been covered already. And I'm not going to try to get too deep into the numbers, but I want to just ask you to take a quick survey with me. Raise your hand if you have high-speed internet at your home. Raise your hand if you don't. Okay, a couple don't. I think the fundamental question, we have many numbers, we have many rates, we have many figures that are thrown at you, but the fundamental question before us is, are we responsible for each other as a community? How do we want to move forward as a community? Not individually, but as a community. I think that we need to recognize that cuts are not something on a spreadsheet, but we have our interim director of the library, Lee Birchfield, here. It's access to the library, it's access to high-speed internet for some people. That is their only form of access to modern day technology, to apply for a job, to do things like that. And I want to also say, libraries, we talk about buckets within the budget. We talk about public safety as though it's only something, it's somebody with a uniform. It's a response to a 911 call. It's also an open library. It's an open community center. It's a network. It's the back office that actually pays the bills for the police department. That's my office. It's the technology that actually provides the information technology for the computer that's in the police car. So I want you to think a little more broadly than just whatever the specific numbers are. Now, having said all that, I'm going to throw some numbers at you, but I do want you to think about the fundamental question. We have a lot of momentum as a community. We have moved forward in the last decade. We've seen exponential growth in our investment. Councilman Piagentini mentioned that we're at full employment. It doesn't seem like that's the product of an overtaxed city. That's a product of good economic strategy and of momentum, of investment in the right parts of the city, all throughout the city and together as a community. So the question we have to ask ourselves is, do we want to live in a world where you have more reductions of services, where items are reduced and we're moving a little bit backwards, or do you want to live in a world where you're moving forward and that we capitalize on the momentum that we have as a city? That's what we have before us. I want to thank Councilman Ackerson for making my point that I will make. We have lived through a recession. We did have cuts. The difference is we've taken those easy cuts. We've sold surplus property. We went from having pension be a little under 8% of the operating budget to almost 14%, and it's going to keep growing as a percentage of the operating budget. The truth is, nobody likes legacy cost. They're not fun. They're services that have already been consumed. That's the nature of legacy cost. That's why we have this fundamental discussion and why we're having some leadership on the council to say, what does it look like going forward? How do we solve this structurally going forward? It is not something that is as easy as saying there's a future capital project. We'll all benefit from it. Let's tax ourselves for it. That's a local option sales tax. That's not what we have before us. We have a legacy cost, and we have to address it. It's going to be addressed in one of 3 ways. We're either going to have increased taxes, we're going to have reduced services, or some combination of the 2. It's appropriate that we have this public conversation about it. I'm glad that you're here to attend. I don't have too much more to say other than I would just say, as Councilman Piagentini noted, government is a service industry. You may not have called 911 last year, but if you did, you expected it to work. You expected someone to pick up the phone, answer you, and send a responder. And that responder was in a car that was handled by a fleet mechanic. That responder had technology in the ambulance with him or her to help you or your family in that need. That is what government is. You call and we answer. Thank you.
Thank you, Daniel. All right, at this time, we're going to open it up and ask our 2 board members today, Drew and Nicole, to present the questions that the audience has posed. So, Drew?
Thank you. This is a question for the group. Whatever happened to first fully funding safety and health, police, fire, trash pickup, and roads, and then with what remains, fund everything else? The idea that first cuts will go to the police is a betrayal of the public trust.
Anyone, Bill, you want to jump in first?
I'll jump in on that.
Okay.
That's fine. You know, you're correct, and that's why if we're looking at cuts, it has to be to the non-public safety sectors first. What I'll be rolling out this week, and again, I'm a Democrat. We have a bipartisan group of us looking at these things. There are, as we talked about high-speed internet and things like that. The question is do you get rid of all that stuff or do you cut back? Does the library have to potentially, rotate hours around? But at the end of the day, public safety should be the number one factor. We've already cut public safety to the bone over the years. We underpay officers now. We've got a problem there. And so right now the mayor has proposed 15.4%, $15.4 million in cuts to public safety, and public safety is going nuts over that. We need to find a much less number, to where we're actually looking to our other services for this deficit problem that we have.
Okay. Daniel?
Well, public safety represents 60% of the budget. I think it would be odd for the mayor to say what the potential reductions might be by saying we didn't examine 60% of the budget. We didn't take a look at that. So that, and I believe public safety is a little broader than just the people with uniforms on, but I think that that's one of the things to relay. We are a service industry. About 2/3 of the cost of the budget is personnel. That's public safety, and I think that's something that we had to take a look at as well. You can imagine if you're sitting in your seat saying, why did you not examine more than half of your budget?
And I want you to imagine if you exclude from cuts 60% of the budget of $620 million, and then you decide I'm going to cut $35 million out of what's left. What kind of cuts would you have to what's left? And what's left? Your libraries, your parks, all of the other services that we provide, picking up your garbage, everything else we do for you. So to say that public safety is off the table, I think just means that the cuts are even more devastating for everything else we have in the community if we don't raise revenue.
All right, next question,
Okay,
Nicole?
so this is a two-part question. The first part of the question is to Daniel. Do we have a choice on paying Frankfurt our pension obligation? And then the second question is for Brent and Anthony. What cuts that the mayor recommends do you agree with? So we'll let Daniel go, and then you two can answer.
Okay, the short answer is we do not have a choice. We're mandated to participate in the pension system. Councilman Hollander is the chairman of the Budget Committee. He had two guests from the Kentucky League of Cities and the Kentucky Association of Counties, and they laid out what would happen if we were to not pay the bill. Effectively, beneficiaries would not receive their checks. We could potentially have city funds and property attached. We would still owe the bill, likely have interest and penalties, and we've received an opinion from the county attorney just to pursue that logic all the way through. I would also take the opportunity while we're talking about the mandated participation from Frankfurt. This is one of the things that at the 30 to 40 community hearings we've heard over and over is we need more local control over our revenue options, which is something the mayor's called for, not only in the form of the local option sales tax, but just in terms of addressing pension. We need more tools in our toolbox to be able to address this. Part of the reason we're having this discussion on insurance premiums is it's one of the limited tools that we already have.
So there's, so Dan's 100% right. We have to pay the bill, period, full stop. But in addition to that, there's also 100% agreement on what I just refer to more broadly as tax reform. We need tax reform in this city. The state is going through a process related to that, moving toward consumption taxation away from income taxation. We need to go through a very similar process here. We're only allowed to tax two things in Metro Louisville. That is income and savings. Income through the occupational tax, and savings through you save money, you buy a house, we tax your property. You save money, you buy an asset, we tax your insurance on that asset. So the bottom line is we are taxing the two things we want people to do more of, and we have no ability, restricted by the state legislature current statute, to change that and move toward other consumptive taxes which allow us to benefit from tourism, income from tourist activity. So there's 100% agreement, and we need to pursue that, which is why, part of the reason why I want to solve the one-year problem and continue working toward that structural change. I understand how Bill worded Councilman Hollander, because it's going to get confusing when I say this twice, how Councilman Hollander referred to the bill and the shall language, but in my experience, once a tax is formed, the stamp tax was a temporary tax, okay? And we all know where that's gone, right? So for me, it's better to take this 1 year at a time and fight for that long-term structural reform. Are there cuts we agree with that the mayor's put forward? Yes. I don't have the full spreadsheet here. I'm not getting into that level of the weeds, but there are some areas that the mayor put forward that I thought weren't ridiculous. I thought, frankly, that him starting with and the level that he went to with public safety was too much. To me, that was a negotiating tactic. It wasn't. He never intended to move forward with those cuts. It was a way to show that okay, if you take my assumptions, you must agree with the tax increase.
When we look at public safety, everyone uses that word. No one has really sat down and defined the encompassing of public safety. I'm just taking it solely as fire, police, EMS, corrections, youth detention, those categories. I mean, if other folks want to sit down and lump it, maybe we can better define it. When I hear a $630 million budget and 60% goes to public safety, I can't define that 60% because we've not defined public safety. But it tells me if I assume those numbers, we have $252 million goes to non-public safety. A 10% cut in those departments would raise $25.2 million, leaving us $10 million short. So you say, where do I agree with the mayor? I don't agree with any of the mayor's numbers right now because we've not had time to have each one of these departments come in and talk about where we can cut. What the mayor has not discussed, but the council has sort of forced the issue, is finally we're talking about the car rental tax, out-of-towners potentially coming in, renting cars and paying into our system, much like you see in Florida and other places that you travel. There's $1 million. So, but now the mayor's talking about that. So I would agree with the mayor and the people who are sponsoring his present ordinance on that. I don't agree with anything other than on the proposed cuts that he laid out. The only thing that I would definitively say I agree with is the reduced capital bonds. Do you realize that in this city in 2010 we had a bond payment, our payment, just like a credit card bill, our interest payment of $36 million. In 2019, it's going to be $56 million. So I do agree with Mayor that maybe we shouldn't be bonding as many projects because, again, there's a bill that comes with that also. That's smart spending. So that's probably the only thing I agree with the mayor. The nice thing about these discussions and this crisis, we've added to the conversations. Just yesterday, we talked about, parking garages. The mayor has down, let's privatize the zoo. Well, we've now put on the table potentially privatizing our parking garages, which have a economic value of we have $90 million in bond debt, but they're valued at approximately $170 million. There's money to be made there in the long term. And so until we have full discussions, I don't think we should be talking any taxes then we'll know what we can do with cuts. Thank you.
Bill, and then we'll move to the next question.
I would point out that the dollar amount that Brent just talked about is principal and interest. It's not just interest that we're paying for those bonds, and that's pretty important. I sometimes get in trouble in my district if I quote Governor Bevin favorably, but I'll do it here. He said at a State of the Commonwealth address, talking about our pension obligation and the need for tax reform, and I'm going to agree with Councilman Piagentini. We do need tax reform. We desperately need more options in the city, and we need tax reform in the state. But the governor said at that address, talking about our pension obligations and tax reform, we need tax reform, and it can't be revenue neutral. It just can't. In fact, the General Assembly raised taxes last year to help the state pay for their pension obligations. So we have a decision here. Are we going to just cut to pay for our obligations? Or are we also going to look for revenue options like the state did, and like the governor said, we have to?
Thank you. All right, Drew?
Our next question is addressed to Councilman Hollander. How is it possible that this budget challenge apparently caught some members of Metro Council apparently by surprise? Were they not aware this situation was growing?
So I don't want to speak for anybody else. I will tell you it did not come to any surprise for me. Last April 26th, the mayor came and spoke to us. That was 13 days after the General Assembly overrode the governor's veto and told us that our pension bill increase would be 12% a year. 13 days later, the mayor came and spoke, and the headline in the Courier-Journal the next day said that the mayor proposed his budget, but it came with a warning. That was the headline. And the warning was that this was going to be a drag on our finances without painful cuts or additional revenue for the foreseeable future. So I don't know why anyone would be surprised at what we're looking at. We knew on April 13th, when the General Assembly acted, that we would be moving from a pension obligation of $76 million in fiscal year 18 to $136 million annually in fiscal year 23. It was not a surprise to me.
Brent?
I'll say it was a surprise to me, and I think it was a surprise to the lot of the council members. And here's why. When I started off, in my opening, and I apologize, I had to go awfully fast to fit that in 5 minutes, but when I took you down that walk down memory lane, in my last 10 years on council, we've experienced those $20+ million deficits. And every year we've managed to work it out. There was no call to arms. Nobody came over and said, look, let's start. I mean, if in April of last year we knew about it, why didn't we start having discussions and audits and trying to figure out a balance? Because again, no one here is saying potentially no tax at all, but how can you tax something till you know what the bare minimum is? So look at this. No one brought it to our attention. In December, we had a surplus left. Did anyone come before council from the administration, or was there any discussions of budget that, hey, we're going to be looking at taxes next year, or a $35 million, we've determined it's a $35 million shortfall. Don't go spend this money on homeless shelters, a new project. Did anybody say, don't go spend $75,000 to the zoo so they can have a party for their 50th year anniversary? I spoke out against that. No one said we've got this budget crisis, we should be holding things back. It wasn't until January 31st that I sat down with Daniel and they said $35 million and we're going to solve it by either a tax or 10% across the board cuts was the first thing they told me. 7 days later, they came out with their plan of here's where we're going to specifically cut otherwise. Since then, though, we continued on this silly path of, right now we're talking about property giveaways. We tabled in labor economics the 814 Vine Street property, a property that has the PVA listing it at $88,000, that the ordinance that's been given to us says it has no value. We're going to give it to somebody for $1. It's over in the Highlands. Come on. We had the administration sent over a $50,000 no-bid contract so we could hire a census person. Well, the census is the federal government's job. We asked about that and said, is there something wrong with the federal government? No, they do a great job. Is there something, if our numbers come up different, that all of a sudden we can argue? No, you can't. We have silly spending, and until we can get that under control, again, the call to arms never went out. So I didn't know. It talked in passing, but we always presumed that the numbers would balance out. It wasn't until the last minute, without any discussion, without any audits, without any budgetary talks, that all of a sudden it's $35 million or the sky is falling Chicken Little.
If I may address a little
Yeah,
bit.
and then we'll close this question with Anthony. Yeah, go
Sure,
ahead.
I'm sorry. I just, speaking as the CFO and having our Office of Management budget, the word audit gets thrown around, and I want to make sure that everybody's aware. We are routinely audited. We're audited every year. We produce that audit. It's on our website. It's called a comprehensive annual financial report. We have the federal government come in. They produce a single audit. They are federal and state grant sources that are provided. We have an internal auditor that performs kind of a function review and internal audits. All of the audits related to Metro government are listed there. I just want to clarify if there's any confusion. I think what Councilman Ackerson's saying as an audit is the priorities of spending, and that's really the 8-week process in May and June when the council approves a budget, and then the interim period from July until the next budget when they have committees that review contracts that come before them, projects, anything like that. So I don't want there to be any misconception that there hasn't been audits. I encourage you to go to our website. There are numerous audits from numerous sources.
So this is where I get to play the new guy card. Nobody told me. All right. So no, I mean, I was just watching the mayor's campaign videos. Everything looked good. So, but seriously, I will say if Bill's absolutely correct, Councilman Hollander is absolutely correct about those public statements that were made, then I just question why the general fund expenditures have grown by 4.5% each year over the last 2 years, right? Each budget year of the last 2 years, our general fund expenditures have gone up roughly 4.5% every single year. So if we know Armageddon is coming, why did we increase the budget over 2 years, just general fund expenditure by about 9%?
Okay. Bill wants to respond real quick to
So-
that
so
comment, and then we'll move on.
Let me
to the
say,
next.
one of the reasons our general fund expenditures go up is because of things like cost of living increases, including in our collective bargaining agreements. We just entered into, it has to be approved by council, a collective bargaining agreement with Louisville Fire, which calls for a 2% cost of living increase. Councilman Piagentini voted present on that yesterday. It was approved in committee. Now, you know, it is hard to find people who want to be Louisville firefighters, Louisville police officers, Louisville EMS operators. And if we say we're not going to pay you any more, it's going to be even harder to find those. And when you have 2% cost of living increases, your general fund operating budget increases. That's something that we deal with every year. So we can say no more increases, but we'll have far fewer police officers, firefighters, EMS, and all the other people who work for metro government.
Thank you. All right, Nicole?
Yes, this question is for everyone, and Councilman Ackerson touched on this a little bit. Are there city metro services that could be privatized, reducing our pension footprint?
So I'll just start. So a couple, I'll just give 2 examples. One, to describe in a little more detail the park situation, park, P-A-R-K, the parking garages. That is a self-contained entity within government. It costs the estimated value by an expert in the industry. We have to vet all of this, right? He just came and testified at the committee I vice chair that the current asset value of it is about $170 million. There's a current debt obligation bonded about $90 million, so there's an $80 million asset on the table. And there are cities, many of which are in this area, who have engaged, but all over the United States, who have engaged in privatization of those facilities, which gives you not only an upfront multi-million-dollar payment, but ongoing revenue sharing with the organization. So there's one idea. The other one is, look, I live in, as you well know, District 19. All the trash collection and anybody that lives outside the Urban Services District is done by private industry. Inside the Urban Services District is done by Public Works, by the government. And the best estimates are we pay a 40% premium compared to what private companies can provide that service for. So there are some options that we have not completely vetted out related to things that don't actually cut service, would maintain similar service, but shift how we use assets and revenue and generate new opportunities for us as a city.
Well, go ahead, Bill.
Sorry, did I go too far?
So, yes, there are things, and the mayor has proposed, if we don't have any new revenue, the Louisville Zoo, privatizing it. We've proposed, the mayor's also proposed, and we've said this is an option, selling the Bell of Louisville. We could certainly sell off assets. That's certainly something that we can do and privatize services. Is that good for the community? You know, I think you have to look very carefully at those kind of things. I also think things like park, and I'm all for exploring all options. But if you look at some things like Indianapolis, for example, which is actively looking at canceling the agreement they entered into because it's being far more lucrative to the private partner than it is to the city, or Chicago, where I think their parking deal was generally viewed as a disaster, I think you have to be very careful, particularly if you're rushing into something to solve a short-term issue by privatizing public assets. It's just, you know, we need to be extremely careful about that, and I'm sure we will be. And we ought to look at everything. But yes, there are things in Louisville Zoo, it's actually something the mayor proposed.
Yep. Real quickly, Daniel, first of all, as we've just pointed out, and as Bill pointed out, you know, we shouldn't be rushing to do anything. You know, we should be putting the brakes on everything, having discussions. But yes, there are things that we could be doing. I mean, we've talked about the parking garages. Dan, you tell me if I'm wrong on this one, but I thought that the Bell of Louisville was outsourced. We owned it, but it was handled by a private company prior to merger. I could be wrong about that. I know, and I don't believe that we're talking about selling the Bell. I believe we're talking about dry
Ceasing
docking the bell.
operations, correct.
So no one's talking about selling the bell, as we just heard. But, golf courses, there's other, there are things that we could do. I mean, should we potentially be looking at closing golf courses? We lose money on a couple golf courses. Should we be closing a few and driving the revenues to the other facilities? Should we maybe be looking to outsource with a P3 public-private partnership to where we still own the golf course, but somebody else manages and pays us? It's all about making money. If we make money, then we have money to pay for these things. And that's the goal. No one here wants to say, the hell with services. The key is if we're on solid financial ground moving forward, we'll have more money in the future to invest in people and not just brick and mortar.
I really want to just address the actual pension question of what can we do to curtail our pension footprint, and just be clear. We are a member of CERS, that's the County Employee Retirement System. It's a multi-employer system across the state. And up until the retirement system changed its assumptions after the board was replaced, we were funded at about 63%. Overnight, with the assumption change on rates of return and on payroll growth, we dropped to 52% funded. Still the best of the other pension brothers and sisters that we have in teacher retirement and state retirement. But I want to be clear, part of why we're here is because we don't control our own pension. I mentioned we don't have revenue options. The council unanimously passed in the fall of 17 a free CERS resolution, which said we want to take control of CERS, of the way we fund ourselves, the way we invest, our assumptions that we make for our growth. We don't have that option. We're currently about a little more than 2/3 of the assets, and have 1/3 of the seats on the board. So I want to be clear of why we're even having the discussion in the first place, is we don't control our own destiny on the expense side of the ledger. We've talked a little bit about the need to control our own destiny on the revenue side of the ledger, but I just want to be clear that this is something that's being driven by the retirement board, changing assumptions and ratcheting up the contributions that we need to make without giving us any tools to address it, or without really giving us a proper say in it. So I do want to address that. There have been 4 or 5 pension reforms to lower the benefit by tier of employee. About 70% of the liability relates to people who started working in the system prior to 2002. So I just want to be clear, there have been changes, and we are curtailing our liability going forward. There are less generous benefits that are going forward. And guess what happens when you have less generous pension? People who are a new firefighter or a new EMT, they actually want to be compensated more because they're not under the same pension plan that their fellow workers are. So it is not an easy solution, but it is something that we have. I just want to make sure that everybody understands this is coming from the retirement system, and it's something that locally, the local participants did not have a say over the assumption changes, or even how they were implemented, if they could have been implemented in a manner to not generate such a steep increase so quickly.
I think that brings our luncheon to a close today. So thank you all 4 of you panelists, for coming today. We really do appreciate all the information. And on behalf of the entire Louisville Forum, we do, again, thank you for being with us today. And as an expression of our appreciation, we will make a donation on your behalf to a pre-selected charity that we have a list. The board came up with a list to make sure that those charities benefit Louisville. So that will be made in your name. So I did want to make one announcement, especially for you members who know to come every second Wednesday. Unfortunately, due to scheduling conflicts, our next meeting is going to be Wednesday, April 17th. And again, this is a change. It's usually the second Wednesday, but this will be the third, April 17th. And again, we apologize for the inconvenience. We are still working out the details of that luncheon, but as soon as they are available, we will send out our email blast and post it on our website. And you can go online at louisvilleforum.org to make reservations, or call our voicemail at 329-0111. Thank you and have a great day.